This is not the story you think it is. It is not the story of Mac Brazel finding debris on the Foster Ranch in July. It is not the story of Major Jesse Marcel driving out to collect it. It is not the story of the press release, or the retraction, or the weather balloon, or Project Mogul. It is an earlier story, a quieter one, from June. 3 weeks before anyone found anything in a field northwest of Roswell, a man was digging a water well south of town. He was at 120 feet when he hit something. He was told by the military to stop. He was told to seal the shaft. He went home. He never spoke about it publicly. The Pecos Valley sits in southeastern New Mexico, and beneath it runs one of the most productive aquifer systems in the American Southwest, the Roswell Artesian Basin, a vast underground water reserve first struck in 1890 when a merchant named Nathan Jaffa had a well bored in his backyard on Richardson Avenue and hit artesian water that flowed to the surface under its own pressure. Within a decade, hundreds of wells had been drilled across Chaves County. Farmers, ranchers, the military base that arrived in 1941. Water was the resource that made everything in that desert possible, and the wells to reach it were a routine feature of life in Roswell in 1947. The standard depth to reach the main artesian zone in the southern part of Chaves County was between 90 and 150 feet. You drilled until you hit it. Some came in shallower, some required more. Earl Dodson had been drilling wells in the Pecos Valley since 1931. He knew what 120 feet felt like. He knew what it was supposed to sound like when the bit reached the aquifer zone. What he hit on that June morning did not sound like anything he had experienced in 16 years of well work. Dodson had been hired by a rancher named Cal Perkins to drill a water well on a property approximately 7 miles south of Roswell, along what is now called South Main Street, though the road designations in Chaves County have changed several times since 1947. The contract was straightforward, $60 plus materials for a standard well to the aquifer. Perkins had been using a shared surface pump from a neighboring property and wanted his own water source for an expansion of the livestock operation. Dodson arrived the first week of June with his rig. The first week of drilling was routine: sandy soil, caliche hard pan at around 30 feet, clay and sandstone below that. The bit dropped steadily, 40 feet, 60, 80. At 90 feet, Dodson expected to be getting close. The water readings in that area of the county said 90 to 110 feet. At 110 feet, nothing. At 115 feet, the clay was still dry. At 120 feet, the bit stopped, not because it hit rock, because it hit something it could not penetrate. Dodson pulled the bit and examined it. No damage, no unusual wear. The cutting teeth were intact. Whatever was at 120 feet had stopped the drill without breaking it. He lowered a weighted line to measure the depth again. 120 feet, 2 inches. He lowered a different instrument, a listening device, essentially a tube with a bell end, used to detect the sound of water movement underground. He heard something. Not water. He described it to his wife that evening at dinner. He said it was like a hum, low and steady, not the movement of an aquifer, not the vibration of his equipment, something else. His wife, a woman named Luella, remembered that he was unsettled in a way she had not seen before. He ate dinner without finishing it. He sat on the porch that evening without talking. She asked him twice what was the matter. He said he didn't know what he had hit and that he intended to investigate in the morning. He did not get the chance to investigate himself. The next morning, 2 jeeps arrived at the Perkins property before Dodson. When he pulled in at 7:15, there were already men there, uniforms. He described them to Luella as officers. He recognized the insignia from the Roswell Army Air Field, which had been part of daily life in Chaves County since 1941, and whose personnel were a common presence in town. He counted 4 men. 2 stayed by the jeeps. 2 approached him. The conversation was brief. The senior of the 2 officers told Dodson that the shaft had encountered a classified federal installation and that the drilling could not continue. He used the specific phrase, classified federal installation. Dodson remembered the phrase because he asked what it meant and the officer repeated it without clarifying. He also told Dodson that the shaft needed to be filled from the bottom up using the caliche fill material Dodson had been storing on site, and that the operation needed to be completed that day. He handed Dodson a document. Dodson, who had not finished 6th grade, said later that the document was printed on government paper with a seal he recognized as military, that there were several paragraphs he did not read carefully, and that there was a line at the bottom where he was told to sign. He signed it. The two officers stood nearby while Dodson spent the morning filling the shaft. By early afternoon it was done. The officers left. Dodson drove to the Perkins house and told Cal Perkins he would not be completing the well. He gave Perkins back $30, half the advance, and said there had been a complication he could not discuss. Perkins, who had his own relationship with the airbase through a livestock supply contract, did not press him. 3 weeks later, the Roswell Daily Record ran a front-page story. The headline read, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in region." The next day, the military said it was a weather balloon. The story that would define the town for the next 80 years had begun. Earl Dodson read the newspaper. He did not say anything. What he had hit in the ground 7 miles south of town 3 weeks before, the thing that made a sound like a hum, the thing that 2 military officers arrived to protect before he had even started the next morning's work, he kept to himself. The document he had signed, whatever it said, was apparently effective. Luella Dodson had a younger sister named Margaret who lived in Carlsbad, New Mexico, 40 miles south. Margaret Renfrew was not from Roswell and had no particular connection to the airbase or its operations. She was a schoolteacher. She and Luella wrote to each other regularly. In a letter dated March 1952, almost 5 years after the incident, Luella described what Earl had told her. The letter was not about Roswell. It was about something else, and the reference to the well came up in the middle of it, almost as an aside. She wrote that Earl had always wondered whether what he found underground that June had anything to do with what they found in the field the next month, and that he had decided it probably did not, but that the hum stayed with him and he thought about it sometimes. She wrote that he would never tell anyone officially because of what he had signed. The letter was preserved by Margaret Renfrew's family after her death in 1978. It passed to her daughter, who did not know its significance. In 1994 and 1995, the Roswell incident was at the center of a research explosion: books, congressional inquiries, Air Force reports. Researchers descended on Chaves County looking for anyone who had been present in 1947 and had anything to add to the public record. One researcher obtained a collection of letters from Margaret Renfrew's daughter. The Luella Dodson letter was in the collection. Earl Roy Dodson had died in 1961. Luella died in 1969. Cal Perkins had died in 1974. The property south of Roswell where the well had been drilled had changed hands 4 times since 1947. The researcher drove to the location. The property in 1995 was a residential development, houses, streets, a neighborhood built sometime in the 1970s over what had been ranch land. The researcher identified the approximate location of the Perkins well site based on road descriptions in the letter and county land records from 1947. The address that matched was someone's front yard. The well, sealed in June 1947 by Earl Dodson under the supervision of 2 officers from the Roswell Army Air Field, was under a lawn in a residential neighborhood in Roswell, New Mexico. The researcher filed a request with the National Archives for any record of a classified federal installation south of Roswell in Chaves County, New Mexico, June 1947. No record was found. He filed a second request specifically for any activity orders, property surveys, or personnel dispatches from the Roswell Army Air Field dated June 1 through June 30, 1947. The response noted that many RAAF operational records from that period were destroyed in a records reduction program in 1952. 1952. The same year Luella wrote the letter. The Roswell Army Airfield is now the Roswell International Air Center. Commercial flights, industrial tenants, the runways that launched the only atomic bomb squadron in the world in 1947 now handle cargo and regional passengers. The sealed well is still in the ground, 7 miles south of the old RAAF, 120 feet deep, filled with caliche from the bottom up by a man who signed a document he didn't fully read and went home and never talked about it publicly. The hum he described to his wife that evening. Whatever made that sound at 120 feet, 3 weeks before the most famous event in Roswell's history? It has been sealed since June 1947. Nobody has opened it. Nobody has tried. Nobody, in any public record that exists today, has explained why 2 military officers from the 509th Bomb Group, the only unit in the world cleared to handle atomic weapons, were waiting at a water well south of Roswell before the well digger arrived on the morning after he heard something unexpected underground. That question has no public answer. The well is still there, under someone's front yard, sealed,